follow the advice of Warren Buffett and Steve Jobs, who famously said, learn to say no more. Focus on the absolute most important aspects of your business and not worry about trying to complete everything on your to-do list.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the BFS April 2022 State of the Industry. My name is N.T. Etuk. I am co-founder of Boutique Fitness Solutions. My co-founder, Julian, is also the CEO of BFS. Say hi, Julian.
Good afternoon, everyone.
I'm also the founder and CEO of FitGrid, and we're going to give you our unblemished take on what's happening in the industry right now. But first, we'd like to thank our partners and our sponsors for making this possible. Really appreciate all the brands that you see on this page for supporting us and supporting the industry through all of COVID.
And I want to provide a special thanks to the presenting partner for the State of the Industry, Slate, which is a fantastic cleaning service provider. If you're looking for a company to come in and clean your studios, we invite you to visit Slate and learn more about their business.
Do they do home service also, Julian? Because I need that.
Don't think they do that, but let's ask Miguel, maybe so. So NT, I'm sure you get asked the same question I've been asked for the last 6 months. What is the state of the boutique fitness industry?
Yeah, and it's a great question, right? I have to say that if we're honest about it, it's recovering. And that may seem obvious, but let's break that down. On the one hand, customers and clients are coming back in person to studios and to classes. Look, there was always the interest in fitness and in wellness and in health. We saw that during COVID, people slacked off a little bit. Really what we saw was that from a consumer perspective, it fractured, right? People were doing everything from doing virtual live stream classes to the YouTube videos to things like Peloton to going for walks in the park. And so what previously was a very concentrated set of activities inside boutique fitness studios in person, scattered, fragmented, and now we see it coming back, even to the point where we saw, for example, in October, that Crunch, which we know is not part of the boutique fitness space, but where they were reporting 128% memberships, over what they had pre-pandemic. So we see that coming back, but it's fragmented again. Places like New York and California are seeing less of that than you are states that are sort of in the middle of the country. On the flip side, there are some serious headwinds. We have inflation, challenges. People are, as a result, are not feeling as comfortable going out and spending. We're seeing the impact of that on the stock market. We also see the impact of things like just COVID. It's still around, right? And there are potentially variants that can come in, and it just leads to a certain amount of uncertainty about what we're doing. So people have to hedge against the uncertainty, which is one of the headwinds. We also see that there are very serious headwinds in terms of consumer confidence in what they're going to have in their pocket as a result of all of these other big headwinds. So it's recovering.
And to that point, we recently conducted a survey of studio owners nationwide, including some of our BFS members and some attendees at our annual summit. And we asked them how their average gross monthly revenue for the month of March 2022 compared to their 2019 gross monthly average revenue. And what we learned was that 56% of the respondents are still earning less than 75% of their 2019 gross monthly average. So that supports our belief that the industry is recovering, because we also have been tracking all of our members for the last 6 months. And as of February 15th, or from February 15th of this year, all of our members are growing. And what this survey response shows is that while they're growing, quite a few of them have a long way to go before they recover their 2019 revenues.
So let's do a quick recap on what happened over the past couple of years and our recommendations on 2021. And I know that many of us don't want to recap what happened, but let's do it anyway. So March 11th, 2020, A day that will live in infamy. The World Health Organization declares coronavirus pandemic, but actually they're a little behind the curve because most Americans started to take it seriously from the day before on March 10th, 2020, when Tom Hanks said he had coronavirus. Restaurants start to close down, fitness studios start to close down, in-person facilities start to close down until further notice. People move indoors, virtual classes, DVR, DVD, YouTube, etc., all start to pick up as people try to figure out what they can do, what they can't do. We start to see cases spike, hospitalizations spike really high. Studios get innovative. They start to do things like outdoor classes and ways that they can make things happen on their own and that they are in control of, particularly in the larger cities or the larger areas like California and New York. There was a study that was shown that actually during all of this time, about 30% of studios closed during this time period. Studios and gyms overall closed during that time period. So crazy period for us. But still, people wanted to stay in shape. They became more flexible in what they did. People would start walking, people would start running, people were doing things like Peloton, people were going indoor classes where they could be spread apart. You had your 6 feet of distance sort of thing, and you also had your virtual classes that people were doing. Here's what we had said, back in June of 2021. The first thing, takeaway number one, we need to build a new, strong industry that has consistently financially stable and sustainable businesses. Takeaway number two, we will not achieve our growth potential if we can't hire enough talented people. So owners need to broaden their horizons and look for instructors and staff in different places. Mind you, remember that this was at the point in time when instructors had scattered to all 4 corners of the country, and staff were either working from home, or they were saying, hey, we don't need to work at all. So we need to diversify our base. Takeaway number three, the future is actually bright because consumers still are focused on healthy living, still are focused on their health and fitness. They've just fragmented and moved away from just doing everything in person. Takeaway number four, studios needed to broaden their offerings so that they were serving their clients' total wellness needs. So typically, we focus on activity in the studio and boutique fitness space. There's also nutrition, there is also recovery, and the ability for you to bring more of those total wellness needs to offer more personalized services, et cetera, is something that allows you to diversify your revenue streams or make more money from the customers that are coming in the door. So that's what we said in June 2021. All right, so chapter 3, let's talk about some of the headwinds that we're seeing. It's clear and it's apparent that clients are starting to come back into studios in person, but it is also true that there is some significant headwinds that we're facing. So let's talk about them. Number one, the economy. For a lot of people, the good times are rolling. They've been making money during the course of COVID. There was a stock market crash that's happened recently, but over the last year, you can put money in major companies like Amazon and all the rest of that have done really, really well with regards to your investments. Homes and houses are basically piggy banks for them. Retirement accounts are up, and they're finding that as they go back to work, they have great negotiation power. At least they have up until this point. They've had great negotiation power with regards to where they work from, how much their salaries are, and all the rest of that. So the good times are rolling and have been rolling up until this point. We are now starting to see that there are indications we might be entering into a recessionary period. So I mentioned that there are recessionary indications that are coming up. We're seeing hiring freezes, we're seeing job cuts coming across the board. And this is as a result of a number of things, right? We've seen the effect of supply chain issues from around the world. We've seen the effect of the war that's happening between Russia and Ukraine and how that has affected things. Energy prices and all the rest of that have been fluctuating quite a bit. Job cuts and hiring freezes are coming. In fact, Meta, which used to be known as Facebook, recently announced hiring freezes, same as Uber, right? And so we're seeing that people are starting to take a step back, and even a lot of startups are actually starting to cut their workforce because they basically had too many. The well-known example of this that everyone is talking about right now is Peloton, right? They overhired, and overinvested during the pandemic, and now they're trying to right size their company, and a lot of that is accompanied by hiring freezes and also job cuts. If you look at Goldman Sachs, the ex-CEO Blankfein says the recession possibility is a very, very high risk factor for the economy moving forward.
Let me add something here, NT. Blankfein's view is not unanimous. In fact, another Wall Street economist recently wrote that there's zero certainty on where the economy is heading. You have a recession camp, a soft landing camp, and everything in between. And we know that historically, small businesses experience the pain of a recession before large corporations, which makes the results of a recent survey of 600 small businesses that was conducted for the Wall Street Journal so troubling. 57% of small business owners expect economic conditions in the US to worsen in the next year. That's up from 42% just 1 month ago. And it's equal to the all-time low that was recorded in April of 2020. So while the economists are uncertain about the future of the economy, it appears that the majority of small business owners are expecting a downturn for the rest of this year.
And there was a survey done that asked the question, which of the following would you consider doing if higher prices persist? And you see people saying that, they cut back on dining out, cut back on driving, cancel a trip or vacation, cancel a monthly subscription. Monthly subscription, that sounds a lot like studios, right? Switch to a generic product, delay buying a car, delay buying a home, borrow money, and then stop paying their bills finally. So people are actually already thinking about this, and we see that starting to have its impact. So yes, people are coming back to studios, but boutique fitness studios generally have higher prices than general gyms. So if this recessionary issue continues, that recessionary feeling continues, then we'll start to see people making trade-offs between how much money do they want to spend and can they spend on things like fitness. So there's a debate going on right now whether or not the work from home trend is something that is more permanent or something that's only temporary. Our view of it is that there's a permanent shift that is happening here. There are certainly companies that will say that their people can work or must work from offices, but during this interim time period, right, more companies are saying, hey, we'll give a little bit of flexibility, on that. So we think that there's going to be a meet in the middle, sort of thing, if you go 5-10 years from now, where people start to reconstruct the idea that they want in-person environments, but so many people have become accustomed to this idea of working from home that it's a permanent shift towards that being a part of companies' sort of mindset about what their workers are going to be able to do, right? And if you look at that with regards to how people think about their fitness, Julian?
Allow me to add a few more reasons why it appears that the work from home shift is permanent, at least for the foreseeable future. A recent study by Harvard Business School suggests that 1 to 2 days in the office per week may be the optimal work from home balance for employers and employees. In addition, the Partnership for New York City, whose members include the largest private employers in the city, announced that only 8% of their employees have returned to the office full time, and 78% of their members have adopted some form of a hybrid office. If your studio is located in or near a business district, you will likely need to create a new baseline to measure your progress as you strive to return to 2019 revenues, because you are likely operating in a different business environment today. We'll discuss this more in our recommendations.
Yeah, and this is going to be hard to combat because, literally, and the reason why we said it's going to take time, for this to shift back the other way to the extent that employers would prefer to have people in person. It's a competitive marketplace, it's a competitive workplace. So if you have, let's take a developer, for example, and with one company, they can work from home and they prefer to do that or work from the mountains of Montana for that reason. And then you have another company that's saying, no, you have to be in the office in the middle of, this city over here. That's just, for a lot of people, that is just going to be a no-brainer. They're going to go with the company that offers greater flexibility. So it will make it more difficult, for employers to get people back fully in person unless they're in industries where you really need that face-to-face contact. The flip side of that and the opportunity is that there's a wider pool of talent, that's available, and a greater level of talent that's available by opening this up, not just nationally, but also internationally as well.
To add to your point, NT, recently both Apple and JP Morgan Chase have been forced to scale back on their plans for return to office. Apple was going to require its employees to work in office 3 days a week, but there was essentially a revolt amongst their employees, and now they're going to keep it at 2 days a week. And Jamie Dimon at JP Morgan Chase has been one of the most vocal proponents of return to office for the last 18 months, and he's been forced to scale back JP Morgan Chase's plan. So this does not appear to be a short-term trend. It's something that we as an industry are going to have to address. Another headwind is employment. A recent study of small business owners by Goldman Sachs revealed that the number one challenge they face is staffing and hiring. And 3/4 of small business owners who were surveyed reported difficulty recruiting qualified workers because they are struggling to compete with larger employers on pay and benefits. Larger employers such as Verizon, which recently raised its minimum wage to $20 an hour. Target, CVS, and Amazon, all of whom raised their minimum wages recently. The New York Times reports that more than 40 million people left their jobs last year, many in retail and hospitality, because workers realized they could find better ways to earn a living, get higher pay, stable hours, and more flexibility. But the Great Resignation should really have been called the Great Promotion, because according to the New York Times, many of last year's job quitters are actually job swappers who tended to be in leisure, hospitality, and retail. In leisure and hospitality, the rate of workers quitting rose to nearly 6% from 4% before the pandemic began. And LinkedIn recently published a list of the top 10 industries that frontline workers have been moving to, and fitness isn't among them. We'll discuss some strategies to combat this headwind in our recommendations.
And let's be real, folks. I had mentioned this in the introduction. COVID's still here. The COVID death toll officially reached 1 million in recent days, which is more than the combined populations of Boston and Orlando, right? And if you look into the future, the waves always seem to happen in the fall. So if we look at the fall and the winter, it could potentially infect 100 million people. That's what the White House warned on May 7th, 2022. And, we all act as if this is behind us. But, and for the most part, what we see is that people that are getting, COVID in the United States these days are suffering from less severe symptoms, probably as a result of the vaccination levels and, a certain level of herd immunity as people have gotten this. But let's be clear, it's a virus, right? And it can shift again. And we know that always starts to happen in the fall and the winter. And so we just need to be aware. We'll fast forward to some of the recommendations that we have. One of those recommendations being around omnichannel. We would very much, just to presage one of the things we would say there, just as a defensive move, you should probably keep your live stream, options and all the rest of that until you're sure what's going to happen with this, because stopping and starting again is probably not something that would be a good idea.
We're at the point now where most vaccinated people are not dying from COVID. So that's not the reason we're mentioning this as a headwind. We had a conversation recently with one of our mastermind members who has 4 instructors. During the time of the conversation, 4 of her instructors had tested positive. So the challenge for studio owners isn't that you, your staff, your instructors, your employees, your clients are likely to die from COVID, but rather the strain of having members of your team test positive and the strain that causes on staffing, scheduling, owners having to step in and teach a class at the last minute. That's what we're really talking about here. COVID is still here, it's still disrupting routines and schedules among staff and instructors.
Yeah,
That's
disruptive. Disruptive is the right word. Yeah.
Another headwind that I'd like to talk about for a moment is work-life balance. In the same survey, we asked people what their number one challenge is, and everyone always mentions finding new clients and getting new clients and client retention. When we conducted a survey recently, we asked a question about primary business challenge, and as you can see, client acquisition, client retention, growth strategy always hold highest in the surveys. People rarely want to acknowledge that work-life balance is their primary business challenge. But in the last couple of months, as we prepared for the summit, we had the opportunity to talk to a lot of studio owners. And one thing that we heard consistently was that owners are tired and exhausted, and their schedules are busier than they've ever been. In fact, several owners said to us they've never been busier. And there's no simple solution for that. And we certainly don't have a simple solution for that. We know most of you listening to this are probably working moms of young children, and certainly parenting is your number one priority. All we're doing here is acknowledging that this is a headwind for you to consider what you can possibly do to not inject more balance into your life, but just be mindful of the fact that if you are running on a hamster wheel that makes you feel like like you're running faster than ever, that's probably not sustainable. And is why even McKinsey recently talked about COVID-19 and burnout being a hidden headwind for all working parents, and business owners have challenges that the average working parents don't have. So the two recommendations we can make in this regard are: number one, follow the advice of Warren Buffett and Steve Jobs, who famously said, learn to say no more. Focus on the absolute most important aspects of your business and not worry about trying to complete everything on your to-do list. And second, this is an opportunity to revisit your business and look at where you might inject more automation, increase your use of SOPs, enhance the training of your team and your managers and your instructors so the business can run without you being deeply embedded into it. No simple solution to it. We just wanted to showcase what we think is a hidden headwind, because it's not one that people want to talk about often, but they were willing to share with us that this was a challenge that many owners are facing today. EmpowerAid recently released a commercial featuring Simone Biles, who discussed the importance of taking a pause.
Guys, we are missing pauses.
You mean passes?
No, pauses. The secret to winning is to pause.
Time out! I'm taking a step back.
What's the reason?
Sometimes you gotta stop to be, an actual human.
Take a minute to celebrate, right?
Or 20.
Pause is power.
So let's talk a little bit about the tailwind. We've been talking about the doom and gloom and all the headwinds that we're facing, but there's some good stuff that's been happening. So let's talk about that. First of all, consumers are spending like it's 1999, actually more like 2019, pre-pandemic, but they're out. They're shopping, they're traveling, they're working out, they're ready to get out. They've been in place, in home way too long. So that's good news for us. In addition to that, they're spending more and more and more. So if you take a look at the bottom chart, consumer expenditures have been the highest since 1982, and they just continue to increase. People are spending money. They want to get out there. They've earned it. They want to spend it. And if you look at some of the fitness industry comps, two of the companies that we like to look at are Exponential and F45. Why? Because they are solely in the boutique fitness space, but in addition to that, they also are public companies, so we can actually see what their actual numbers are. So if you look at the first quarter comparison in 2022 compared to 1 year ago, 2020, we see Exponential increase gross revenue from 18 million to 50 million. That's up 175% year over year. F45 from 29 million to 50 million, up 73% year over year. All good indicators of how things are bouncing back. And in addition to that, we know that people are coming back to in-store, in-studio experiences because we look at Lululemon. And if you look at the chart that we have here, just look at the bars on the left. This is a comparison of 2022 to 2019. So if those orange bars are positive, that means the number of visits in 2022 minus the number of visits in 2019 was positive. That means that 2022 was higher. So in January, February, and March, the number of visits to Lululemon, an in-store experience that is adjacent to fitness, so an indication that people are coming back to fitness because they're buying more fitness, athleisure wear, etc. All positive. Q1 of 2022 versus Q1 of 2019. All of these are positive tailwinds for the industry.
One of the biggest reasons to be optimistic about the boutique fitness industry's recovery is consumer spending, which is the engine of the US economy. And consumer spending grew 0.7% in the first quarter, despite soaring gas prices and the Omicron wave this winter, which restrained spending on restaurants, travel, fitness, and other similar services. And so far, higher prices haven't dampened consumers' willingness to spend, especially on in-person experiences. In fact, many of the companies whose stocks skyrocketed during the pandemic, Meta, Zoom, Netflix, and Shopify, for example, have seen their stock prices fall more than 25% recently. And as many of us know, Peloton announced that they lost $757 million in their most recent quarter. Meanwhile, sales of deodorant, tooth whiteners, razors, and cosmetics have increased as consumers have returned to spending on in-person experiences. For example, restaurant reservations at the most recent Mother's Day were up 39%. People have returned to movies and Broadway, and consumers are traveling more. All of this is good news as we are looking forward to recovering to 2019 revenues and beyond. There's another factor driving consumer spending, and that's millennials, many of whom are saving less and spending more to live their best life now. Many adults under 35 are throwing financial caution to the wind. It's all about saving less, spending more, and pursuing their passions. So if you don't offer classes that appeal to millennials, you may want to consider doing so.
Let's talk a little about some of the survey results that we have from questions that we asked you. What was your primary business challenge? Most people are saying client acquisition, followed by developing a growth strategy for your studio, which again relates to client acquisition. Getting past members back. So it's all about getting past people in the door, getting new people in the door, figuring out how you continue to grow back out of the hole that we went into during COVID. Then, of course, and this makes sense, then, of course, you get people back in the door, you're trying to figure out, how do I retain them? How do I make sure that given the plethora of opportunities they have for fitness now, the wide variety of opportunities that they have, how do I get someone that has come back in the door, that's come in the door for the first time to stay with me? And then, of course, there's the big one. How do I manage, how do I retain, and how do I recruit, my instructors? Because the instructors are the lifeblood, of the things that you're doing. Without the instructors, you don't have classes to teach, etc. We've seen instructors scatter. We've seen instructors decide that they're going to go into other industries. There's a huge instructor recruiting and retention problem that we see coming out of the survey results. And finally, things like studio ops, work-life balance, and hiring front desk and management roles sort of come in further down the track.
We also asked studio owners if they raised prices in the last year, and about 60%, 65% said yes, 30% said no. In prices, we mean your class pass prices, your membership prices. And then we asked, did you raise wages? And this was closer, essentially 50-50 of who among you raised wages. And again, this goes back to the headwind of both inflation and your cost increasing, as well as the increased competition you have for hiring all of your staff at every level. So this is a real challenge, and you can see the response is about 50-50.
Dun, dun, dun. Recommendations.
So recommendation number one for navigating these headwinds and leveraging these tailwinds is boutique fitness businesses need to return to client building
basics.
So what do we
Can
mean?
we practice that?
Exactly. Client building basics. So seriously, let's start with a brief history lesson here. Our industry is barely 20 years old, starting with Barry's in 1999. Then SoulCycle opened in 2006, and the industry caught fire in the mid 2010s. And that period of 2014 to 2019, let's call that the golden era of the boutique fitness industry. And that era was fueled by easy lead gen sources such as Facebook ads, Groupon, third-party platforms, including a few of our partners, GymPass, American Specialty Health, Center Wellness. And as a result, some studios generated 30% of their monthly revenue from these lead gen sources. One of our mastermind members even told us, quote, pre-COVID, we didn't have to sell because people walked into our studios and bought class packs and memberships like it was candy. Now we have to teach our staff how to sell, unquote. So during this golden era, 2014 to 2019, our industry grew rapidly without learning the fundamentals of lead gen, sales nurturing, conversions, attrition, retention, LTV. How do we know this? Because these are the topics that we teach in our studio managers group coaching program that we launched last year. And these are new concepts for most of the managers in the group. It's also why the 7-hour BFS Academy sales training that we conducted at the summit was sold out with standing room only. Our industry needs to learn the basics of grassroots marketing so you can fill the room yourselves without relying on third-party platforms, because even the third-party platforms will tell you that they are intended to be incremental revenue for you, not your primary source of new clients. Therefore, as an industry, we need to learn that sales conversion doesn't only mean conversion from trial to member, but also from lead to trial. And we need to train our front desk staffs to capture the contact info from leads so that we can nurture them into prospects, trials, and members. Just yesterday, we had a conversation with the manager at one of our mastermind members who is running a guest member program. And they're not capturing the contact information of the guests. These are the fundamentals we as an industry need to return to. And it's why in McKinsey's recent consumer behavior report, retailers who rely on promotions to bring shoppers into the stores are really struggling. That means we have to cultivate deeper relationships with our potential clients directly, showcase the value that you offer, the community that you're providing, how you can help them achieve their goals, so you don't have to rely on discounts, promotions, Facebook ads, and other platforms beyond your control. Indeed, did you want to add something to this topic?
No, I think you covered it. I mean, client building basics, folks. You got to figure out how to get out into the communities that are around you. We've heard stories from some of our studio owners where, they went out and they went next door, and the people next door didn't know what their business was, weren't in the habit of referring them or anything like that. And whenever we hear stories like that, we're like, that's appalling. Right? Like, the people that are around you should absolutely know what you're doing, because those can be some of your greatest assets in terms of having people refer back in. Recommendation number 2, establish new and varied ways to find talent. So there's no secret here. During COVID, talent, whether it's your front desk talent, whether it's your managers, whether it's your instructors, scattered, right? And they moved to a place where either they didn't need to work because they were getting better compensation by being on government support, or they wanted to move to a place where their family was, or they just decided they didn't want to work, at all. They wanted to take a break, right? And so that put a tremendous strain on many studio owners out there because all of a sudden the business that very much relied on having local talent in the studio was forced to find people that were doing things at a distance. And now that we're coming back, we're in the situation where we are now competing against, as we said before, as Julian mentioned before, you have the Verizons of the world that are offering higher wages at a base pay level than we might be comfortable or than we might want to do. So we're having to even train people in the ins and outs of the business because those people that were there before have moved on to do different things. So listen, that is just the reality. It's the cost of doing business right now. But what we are finding is that a lot of studio owners are being very, very creative in how they're finding new talent. So whereas previously, again, you didn't have to go to some of your community groups, whether it's your church or religious institutions or other community groups out there, you can now start to, do that and source people. Also, you look at different types of people, right? And so whereas previously we were looking for instructors that might have been in person, if you're doing things like omnichannel, you can look at instructors that are at a distance. You can also look at different types of people, right? So there's diversity, in the talent base that we're using. So before we might have had a certain image of what the ideal instructor is. To go beyond that image, we can also see that there are additional people who are out there who can come in and be part, of our talent pipeline.
Let me add to that, NT. One of the tailwinds that we discussed was staffing. And as you know, the war for talent was a recurring theme during our mastermind meetings throughout 2021. One of the things that we observed was that the studios that managed this challenge the best were the ones that did two things: continually source new talent to join their team and identify current team members who could be trained to assume greater responsibility at the studio. And that is exactly what Walmart, country's largest employer, is doing. They recently launched their College to Career program, a fast-track training program for recent college graduates who will receive a mix of classroom lessons, individual mentorship, and hands-on experience in store management, all with the hope of identifying standout performers who can eventually become store managers who earn $200,000 annually. So just as we recommended that you develop proprietary lead gen sources, similarly, we're recommending that you develop proprietary sources of talent.
All right, so let's talk about recommendation number 3, building an omni-channel business. Now, listen, we know that there is some resistance out there to this idea, especially from studio owners. No studio owner started their business saying they wanted to be the chief technology officer for their tech stack. And we saw the exhaustion with Zoom and all the rest of those sorts of forms of technology being used, for businesses that fundamentally feel as if they are in-person businesses. But here's the reality. The reality is that the world has changed. The reality is that the consumer actually wants that flexibility, right? And what you might find that for your studio business, you get back a whole bunch of people that want to do in studio classes, and that might well fill your studios up. But if you don't take advantage of the fact that people are actually doing more and they're doing more online, then you're leaving money on the table. In fact, if you look at this survey that was done by the New Consumer, then only about 5%, look at the bar on the far right, only about 5% of consumers were saying they wanted to be 100% in the gym or in the studio. Everyone else wants to do multiple things. So if you, as a studio owner, can take that into account and test into other channels that your business can be pushed into, you can find incremental revenue streams that help to relieve the burden, just the in-person thing. Because especially in some places, it will take a while to build back to full capacity. So make sure that you do actively explore this idea of an omni-channel business. Pre-COVID, it was the idea that you didn't just need to be one modality, but you could actually be a yoga hit studio. So you do yoga and then you do yoga hit. Now we're saying do omni-channel. This is something that can build up your revenue streams and show you up in case that there are other hits, other variants that come along. Julian?
Indeed. let me discuss the omni-channel recommendation from a different perspective, if I may. One of the things that we've been asked for the last year is, when will things return to normal? And what owners are really asking is, when will people return to the studio? Some people will return, some people will never return. But here's the point that often gets overlooked. Pre-pandemic, the brick and mortar model was only used by 20% of the population. And according to data from IRSA, that percentage hasn't changed in 40 years. In other words, there are huge segments of the population who do not enjoy exercising at a studio, or for whom exercising in a studio doesn't fit their lifestyle. Depending on your modality and your community, an omnichannel approach may provide you with the opportunity to attract new clients who prefer exercising from the comfort of their home, or who prefer exercising in the schedule that works best for them. And that's a perfect segue into recommendation number 4, talking about ancillary revenue. Look, we said this in our 2021 takeaways, and we're saying it again. Diversify your revenue streams and serve your clients' total wellness needs. That can mean serving their nutrition needs, their recovery needs, their meditation needs. And here's what we know. Wellness includes movement of the body, nourishment of the body, mental recovery, and physical recovery. And as an industry, during this golden era, 2014, 2019, most studios had massive success just delivering movement. And now, during COVID, there's been a far greater understanding by the average individual that total wellness includes more than movement. And since we know that 56% of studios are below their 2019 numbers, one way for you to potentially generate ancillary revenue is by serving your clients' other wellness needs: nutrition, recovery, meditation. So to that end, we've formed 2 new partnerships that we're very excited about with Drip Bar and with Eat Love. And you can visit both of them on our website in the partner marketplace to learn more about them. We've heard many of you ask us in the last year, okay, great, we know we should diversify our revenue streams, but how do we do that? Well, we've formed a couple partnerships that may be able to help you to diversify your revenue streams. And finally, recommendation number 5.
So recommendation number 5, continue being adaptable and flexible. We all know about Darwin's survival of the fittest, and we think about that as survival of the strongest. But in fact, that is not true. If you actually listen to the quote, it is not the strongest of the species that survives. It is the one that is most adaptable to change. That is critical. All of you have been adaptable to change over the past couple of years. That is why you are the 70% that made it. You need to stay comfortable with being uncomfortable as we move into the future. Julian, you have anything you want to add to that?
Yes, NT. The recent McKinsey released their recent consumer behavior report, and in there they said we may see as much or maybe even more disruption and change over the next 2 years as we've seen over the past 2 years. And the operating model you had in the past isn't likely to work going forward. So for those of you who have been asking, when will this era end? The answer is, it's not. We're in a new era. This is not pre-pandemic. This is not pandemic. This is the pandemic, soon to be hopefully post-pandemic era. And this is what's going to be required: continued flexibility and adaptability, and not referring to what used to be, because that's not the world we live in anymore.
Yeah, and I mean, listen, it's great that McKinsey actually came out and said it, but I can't remember whether it was my mother or my executive coach that literally, this is a truism for your life, for just you as a person. It is known that what got you to this point is not going to be the thing that's going to get you to the next level. And you can think about that in your life. So if it's in your life, this is also in your business. And because so much of you, us, we are what drive our businesses, this is not just about your business. This is about you. This is about you. What got you to this place is not going to be the thing that gets you to the next level. So get comfortable with that. We're on a path of learning. So let's just learn.
And congratulations, because you have earned your pandemic MBA. And all kidding aside, what this means is that your personal growth, your professional growth as a leader is tremendous. 2 years ago, no one knew how to run a business in a pandemic. And when I say no one, I mean no one on earth at any business of any size knew how to run a business through a pandemic, and you've accomplished it. And when the market conditions change, you're going to take all that you've learned, or you have the opportunity to take all that you've learned and apply it to growing your business and serving your clients' total wellness needs. So congratulations to you for having gotten here. And yet we know that, as we said, the world is going to continue to be turbulent, and we're here to help you throughout the process. So feel free to reach out to us if you want to learn more about our mastermind program, our studio managers group, our executive coaching, our business coaching. We are here as a resource to help you navigate these headwinds, tailwinds, opportunities, and recommendations for your business today, tomorrow, and for the foreseeable future. Thank you for your time today, and thanks to our presenting partner, Slate, for their support of the 2022 BFS State of the Industry.
Thank you, guys. Be well.
Hey everybody, Jessica LaChance here. Do you want more business education for your fitness studio or wellness business? Subscribe to our YouTube channel or our email newsletters, and we'll see you here soon.